It all began on a lazy autumn evening, with the air heavy and cold, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Four friends, Mike, Dan, Laura, and Pete, sat around in Mike's dimly lit basement, scrolling through their phones, bored with the monotony of their daily lives. Pete, with his usual sarcastic grin, tossed out the idea that would change everything. "Why don't we start a fake news site? I mean, it's all over the place, right? People eat that stuff up." The others laughed, but soon the laughter faded into intrigued nods. It was harmless, they thought, a joke, a way to pass the time. They weren't malicious people. Mike worked as a web developer, Dan was an out-of-work journalist, Laura an aspiring writer, and Pete, well, Pete was Pete, the loudmouth who always found a way to stir things up. Together, they created a page under the name The Daily Spin, dedicated to absurd, fabricated stories. At first, it was fun. They posted ridiculous headlines like aliens found living underneath old supermarket or mysterious creature spotted in city park. The posts were so far-fetched that no sane person would believe them. They laughed as their friends shared the articles as jokes, spreading the outrageous headlines across social media. But then things took a turn. One night, after a few too many beers, Dan had an idea that was darker than usual. He suggested they push the boundaries, create something a bit more sinister. With a gleam in his eye, he typed out the headline that would be their first real mistake: "Serial killer on the loose in the suburbs, police clueless." Laura hesitated. "Isn't that a bit much? What if people actually believe it?" Mike shrugged, already hitting post. "Who cares? It's just a joke. No one's going to take it seriously." But they were wrong. The next morning, the article went viral. Panic spread through the suburbs, with people locking their doors, buying security systems, and looking over their shoulders. And then, in a chilling twist, a murder was reported in the exact neighborhood they had written about. The victim's body was found mutilated, with no clues left behind. At first, they didn't connect it. It had to be a coincidence, they thought. But then, it happened again. Another article they had written, this one about a deadly virus spreading in a small town, became real. A mysterious illness began infecting people, causing the town to quarantine itself in a desperate attempt to contain the outbreak. The group began to panic. Pete, normally the most carefree, was the first to crack. "We need to stop this. Whatever we're doing, it's not right. It's like we're making these things happen." Mike, always the rational one, tried to calm him down. "It's just a coincidence, man. We're not causing this. It's probably some crazy copycat killer or something." But Laura wasn't convinced. She had begun to feel an eerie presence ever since the second murder, as if something was watching her, waiting. At night, her dreams were plagued by faceless figures and shadowy entities whispering things she couldn't understand. That evening, as they sat around the table, debating what to do, the power in the basement flickered. For a moment, they sat in complete darkness. When the lights returned, Pete was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "We need to stop posting. Now." But it was too late. They had crossed a line, and whatever was happening, whatever they had unknowingly unleashed, was already in motion. They just didn't know it yet. The silence after Pete's whisper hung thick in the air. The flickering lights cast ominous shadows on the damp basement walls, making the friends feel as if something was lurking just beyond the edge of their sight. Mike, always the skeptic, shook off the tension, but Laura and Dan exchanged uneasy glances. Pete, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. The next day, their group chat buzzed with frantic messages. It wasn't just Pete who was scared anymore. Laura hadn't been able to sleep. "I keep hearing whispers at night," she texted. "And not like regular ones. They're saying things, my name, details about me. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like the lies we wrote are following us." Dan was skeptical. "Maybe you're just stressed out, Laura. The murders were just a freak coincidence. And the virus thing? I mean, it's flu season. People are bound to get sick. It's not our fault." But Laura insisted, her messages becoming more frantic. "I'm telling you, something's not right. I feel watched." Later that evening, they gathered again, this time at Pete's small apartment. He was too paranoid to meet at Mike's place, convinced that whatever was happening was tied to the basement where they had first posted the fake news stories. Pete had the blinds drawn tight, a baseball bat resting by the door, and 3 different locks clicked into place the moment they entered. "We need to delete the page," Pete said, pacing the room. "This isn't just in our heads. Whatever we write, it's becoming real." Dan rolled his eyes. "And what? Just because we delete it, the universe suddenly forgets? Look, we just stop posting and it'll blow over. No need to get all paranoid." But before Pete could respond, Laura's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and went pale. "Guys, someone's posting on the page. Right now." Mike grabbed his phone and checked. Sure enough, there was a new article on the Daily Spin, 4 friends involved in mysterious deaths to be the next victims. Beneath it, a picture of the 4 of them, laughing and smiling, taken just weeks ago when all of this had seemed like a joke. "Who the hell posted this?" Mike's voice trembled. "None of us." "It wasn't me," Laura whispered, her hands shaking as she stared at the screen. "It couldn't have been." Pete, now drenched in sweat, gripped the baseball bat tighter. "It's coming for us, isn't it? This thing we unleashed." The room fell into a suffocating silence, only broken by the faint hum of Pete's fridge. The horror of the situation was sinking in, faster than any of them could grasp. They had been playing with lies, but something else, something far darker, had taken control. The lies had become a doorway, and now that door was wide open. Desperate for answers, Mike suggested they retrace their steps. "Maybe if we figure out where it all started, we can stop it." Laura looked horrified. "You mean go back to your basement? Are you insane?" But Dan, now more curious than afraid, nodded. "He's right. Something shifted when we started posting those stories. Maybe it's tied to that place." Pete, despite his terror, agreed. "If we don't do something, we're next. The article said so. And I'm not waiting around to see if it's right." That night, they made their way to Mike's house, their nerves frayed. The once cozy suburban street now felt alien under the dim orange glow of the streetlights. Shadows seemed to move in the periphery, and every sound, the rustling of leaves, the distant hum of traffic, felt amplified, unnatural. When they reached Mike's basement, no one wanted to be the first to step inside. Mike led the way, flashlight in hand. The room looked exactly as it had the last time they were there, old pizza boxes stacked in the corner, a game console covered in dust. But something felt wrong. The air was colder than it should have been, and the shadows cast by the flashlight seemed to twist in unnatural ways. Suddenly, Laura froze. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. They all stood still, listening. At first, there was nothing. But then, faintly, from the darkened corners of the basement came the unmistakable sound of typing. Click, click, click. It's the sound of a keyboard, Pete breathed, his knuckles white around the baseball bat. But there was no one else in the room. The flashlight flickered again, and as it did, they all saw it. In the far corner, where no one had been sitting, a computer screen flickered to life. On the screen was another article, halfway written, Friends' Final Moments Discovered in a Dark Basement. Mike dropped the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness. We need to leave. Now, Laura screamed, but before they could make a move, the door to the basement slammed shut on its own. They were trapped. The darkness in the basement felt alive. It was suffocating, thick and oppressive, as if the very air conspired to trap them inside. Mike fumbled for the flashlight on the cold concrete floor, but his trembling hands made it impossible to focus. The click of the keys, faint yet unrelenting, echoed from the far corner of the room. Dan stood frozen, eyes locked on the glowing computer screen, where the unfinished article glared back at him. Friends' Final Moments Discovered in a Dark Basement. His pulse pounded in his ears as the weight of their situation came crashing down on him. It's writing itself, Dan whispered, his voice barely audible. Laura backed into a wall, her breath coming in short gasps, eyes wide and glazed with fear. This isn't real. It can't be. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably, and the whispering she'd been hearing in her mind for days now grew louder, more persistent, like an insidious chant drilling into her brain. Pete swung the bat in blind panic at the unseen forces that seemed to be closing in around them. We have to stop it. We have to destroy the page. His voice cracked with desperation. Suddenly, the computer screen blinked off. The soft glow was replaced by an even deeper darkness, and with it came a low, guttural sound, a deep, inhuman growl that reverberated through the basement. It wasn't from the computer. It was from something else. The door rattled violently behind them, but it didn't budge. They were sealed in. We're not alone, Mike muttered under his breath, as if speaking the thought made it real. Something's down here with us. Then it happened. The walls began to pulse, almost like a heartbeat, as cracks appeared in the foundation, snaking across the brickwork, as if the house itself was reacting to the terror. From the fissures, a black, oily substance oozed, spreading like a stain of corruption. Dan moved to the door, desperate, hammering on it with both fists. Help! Somebody! His screams echoed in the confined space, swallowed by the overwhelming dark. But the sound of his cries felt futile, as if the world outside had forgotten them. The whispers grew louder, forming sentences, fragments of the lies they had written. The virus is coming for you. Death follows in the shadows. There is no escape. The words circled them, their own creations twisted into something monstrous. They had written their doom. Laura's breath hitched, and she screamed as the oily substance snaked toward her feet. It's coming for us, she shrieked, retreating further into the corner. The black tendrils writhed and twisted like living shadows, hungry, as if feeding on their fear. Pete swung the bat wildly at the substance, but it passed right through, his blows useless. The bat clattered to the floor. We have to find a way out. His voice was pure panic now. But Mike had stopped moving. His eyes fixed on the dark screen of the computer, and something clicked in his mind. It's the stories. We started this. We have to finish it. What the hell are you talking about? Dan barked, his face pale with terror. Mike spun around, eyes wide, filled with a mad clarity. The stories are real now because we wrote them. We created this. We can still change it. His voice grew stronger. We need to write our way out. But how? Laura shouted, backing away from the encroaching darkness. Without waiting for an answer, Mike lunged for the computer. He sat down and furiously tapped at the keys, fingers shaking but determined. The screen flickered back to life as if answering his touch. Pete stared in disbelief. You're going to write a happy ending? In the middle of all this? It's the only chance we've got. Mike snapped. The oily tendrils inched closer, the walls groaning like a living thing, tightening their hold on the group. But Mike ignored it all, his fingers flying over the keyboard. We survived. He muttered aloud as he typed. The basement door opened. We made it out alive. But the computer screen flashed red. Error. Cannot rewrite fate. Laura screamed again as the blackness touched her feet, and she fell, her body convulsing. Dan rushed to her, but the oily tendrils curled around her ankles, pulling her into the darkness. Her screams were guttural, primal, and then silence. Mike's heart pounded in his chest. No. No. His hands shook as he typed faster. We escaped. We're alive. He pressed the keys harder, but the words on the screen wouldn't change. Error. Error. Dan was next, dragged backward into the darkness, his voice muffled as it swallowed him whole. Pete was standing paralyzed, eyes wide with horror as his friends vanished before his eyes. Mike slammed his fists on the keyboard. We're still here. We're still. Suddenly, the lights flickered one last time, and everything went dark. The sound of typing stopped. The basement was silent. When the police finally arrived, responding to a neighbor's report of screaming from the house, they found the door to the basement open. The room was undisturbed, save for a single computer sitting in the corner, its screen blank, save for one last article uploaded to the Daily Spin. 4 friends found missing after mysterious occurrences. Their final words, "We're still here." The house remains empty. The officers looked at each other, puzzled. No bodies were ever found. But late at night, when the wind is right, some swear they can still hear the faint sound of typing echoing from the abandoned basement. And the lies keep spreading, taking new shapes, new victims. All because someone thought it was just a game.